think it actually, even as it just says going live, I think it's actually already live, but here we are, and just in time for you to leave your chair. Nice.
I had to get shut the door.
Aha, fair enough. All right, well, hello everybody, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. We're here tonight to talk about episode 3 of Survivor San Juan del Sur, and to bid farewell to John Rocker.
Yep.
I think I hesitated to say a fond farewell, but I don't know. I'm thinking fond farewell implies fondness for him, but could it also be fondness for the farewell? I think that would be a misuse of the phrase, but not grammatically incorrect.
No, I mean the phrase is meant fondness for him. So
yeah. Well, anyway, though, yeah, not as fond of him necessarily. Kind of glad he's gone. I mean, he provided some entertainment, but it also started to be the less fun kind.
Yeah, I didn't mind him as much, but their reactions to him were becoming so hateful that it was taking the season in a way that it just didn't need to go.
Yeah.
You know,
he was kind of a distraction.
Right, because he in particular, I mean, he didn't do anything that like upset me. In fact, I thought there were some things that he did were actually fairly decent. Not necessarily as a Survivor player, but as a person. And you know, I thought it was the reaction to Val being gone was a little unfair. And the way that, which one is it? Natalie
is the one that's left.
Natalie. Yeah, I mean, I thought she was much more unreasonable than he ever was.
Well, bear in mind, she was probably also blaming John for her sister getting voted out.
Right. I don't disagree with any of that, but at the same time, like even if, like, say it was a different situation and you knew someone was the ringleader of the other tribe and had voted off, you know, your ally or even your sister, like, it doesn't necessitate, like, that kind of behavior. Like, they found a thing with him to focus on that allowed them to, it basically gave them permission to be more upset than they would be in a normal situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's his fault in that he is the person with that history, but it's not his fault in anything he particularly did on this season. So I'm okay that he's gone because it will calm all of that down, not because I thought he in particular was unpleasant to have around or wasn't entertaining or was negative. Like, he himself was fine. He was inspiring, though, a type of, you know, hate and vitriol that was just not what we watched the show for. So
well, and I think I will agree that, you know, it's not like he did anything really dramatic on the show, but the problem, of course, is just that with his baggage, it creates this context where everything he does has this extra weight to it, even when it's not necessarily appropriate to have it there. But I mean, just for example, think how this looks to the other team. Who are the 2 people who have gotten voted out so far? 2 women minorities.
Yeah.
With his history, with the fact that he promised Jeremy to protect Val and then failed to do so, even if he was sincere in his attempt, which I think was kind of half-hearted. Like, I think he meant it, but I think he also wanted to sort of, you know, the old figure of speech that makes no sense, have his cake and eat it too.
Yeah, he didn't necessarily play a good game of Survivor, and he was unable to, you know, he didn't commit to either one. You know, he knew he was supposed to help her. He kind of tried. And then when he felt like he needed to apologize to Jeremy in person and let him know, hey, I tried, and that wasn't the way things went, that is what initiated. That was more of what caused his tribe, because it was mostly, I forget his name, his ally, the gay
Josh?
guy. Yeah. Josh, yeah. it was mostly Josh that drove the vote towards him.
Mm-hmm.
And Josh was already expressing reservation at this point because of that. It wasn't the challenge, and everything that happened there just made it easier to make that decision. But this decision was already being made when he admitted that he hadn't bought into his alliance, essentially, because he had made this promise on Exile Island that he felt like he kind of had to keep.
Yeah.
And, there's a line later in the show that John says that, he's like, yeah, we're going to leave this tribal council with our alliance solidified. When the reality is he's the only one who was unsolidifying it. It was his behavior that was causing it to not, cohese correctly.
Right.
And that was an example of it. Like you said, you gave a much more simple metaphor in that he wanted his cake and eat it too. He wanted to play both sides, but he didn't commit to either side, and he also let both sides know that he almost became like the wrong kind of swing vote, even though it wasn't really a swing vote. Like he brought that same identical attention, in that we can't really figure out where he's going because he says he's with our alliance, but then he makes this promise to this guy over here and then tries to help her out even though it's against what we're trying to do. Like, we can't really trust him.
Mm-hmm.
And, so, and then the same thing, like, well, I've had the idol for a while, and now I feel like telling Josh made it, like, worse. Like, it didn't make Josh trust him for sharing the idol with him. It made him distrust him for having kept it for a while, and distrust that he would partner with him on it. And so it became worse that he told him. So, like, he just didn't filter out what he should say and when he should say it. He really didn't commit to anything. And so even from a Survivor perspective, he does deserve to be voted out. Like, there's nothing wrong with this vote,
Right. Well, and again, though, like, even though we know the reason that Val went home and the reason that Nadia went home has nothing to do with John Rocker being racist. That's not why either of those happened. But
and
at the
were
same
his
time,
call, really.
Well, true. But the other aspect of it is, when he is a person who has said the things that he has to understand that people are going to have certain expectations about him as a result. And therefore, when they bait him, he has, I think, an increased responsibility to try not to take the bait, which, fair or unfair, he took the bait. I mean, saying things like, if you were a man, I'd knock your teeth out, is not appropriate.
No. And honestly, he didn't just take the bait in that, like, supercharged situation.
Mm-hmm.
He took the bait when he was on Exile with Jeremy. Like, it goes back to that. Like, Jeremy baited him by telling him he knew who he was and kind of softly coercing him into, like, protecting Val by, like, that's kind of how it went down. Like, Jeremy, like, pointed out that, like, he knew who he was. He thought he was this way. Like, he made him feel in a position that John had to do something above and beyond what a normal person would do in that situation because of his history. Like, that's kind of how Jeremy approached it. And got him to promise to protect his wife because, like, Jeremy almost set that up, which is why he reacted I think.
Did he say that to John, though, or did he just say that to the camera? I know Jeremy said. Did Jeremy say that to John, or did he just say it to the camera?
He didn't say it. That's the thing. He didn't say it directly to John, but that's what I'm saying. Because we know from what he said to the camera and how he acted around John, like, he definitely, like, he had to have given off that feeling that, this sort of distrustful feeling while they were in conversation that baited John. Like, I don't think he deliberately baited John and was like, oh, I'm going to have this plan to, like, get him to protect my wife. Like, I think it just naturally went down that way. But there was a bait in that situation that John felt the need in his conversation to go above and beyond what he would had it not been somebody who knew who he was and a minority. If it was just Wes or somebody like that, I don't know that he would have made this elaborate promise that he was going to take care of his, partner.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like that's what he was baited in that situation, and he took it. Maybe not as deliberately.
See, I you might be right, but I hadn't had that impression from that episode. I had the feeling that between the two of them, it was much more of a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours thing. It wasn't like a burden on John because the immunity challenge hadn't even happened yet. It was a mutual agreement. You protect Val, I'll protect Julie. That was the impression that I had, although I don't know that there wasn't additional overtones to it too.
Yeah, see, I really left with the impression that he felt like he needed to do or say something more. And that was really all he was left with, because Jeremy made him feel uncomfortable. If Jeremy was holding those feelings, like he had some mild hostility towards him, like when they were like he was very reserved when he talked to him. Like I felt like in that interaction, like Jeremy definitely cold-shouldered him to a point where John felt like this was kind of his olive branch to him. And that the Julie thing was just sort of the flip side of it, that kind of had to happen to make it not just, I know you don't like me, so I want to do this nice thing for you. It was kind of how they both ended. That was the impression I left with it.
Yeah.
So that, that was my point, though, is that I feel like that he's been, every time this situation has come up in an interaction, he has done something that has negatively impacted his game, as opposed to using it as a way. He never handled it in a way that would move his game forward. He painted himself into a corner on Exile that he was never going to be able to get out of unless Val made it to the merge. And that just wasn't a reasonable thing for him to promise, knowing how his alliance was voting. And the way that they were, planning to go down. But
I think
very impulsive.
Right, and
it's a very summation of what I said. Yeah.
Yes,
Sorry,
he's impulsive, and the truth is too. You're right that I think the problem is he made a promise when it was a situation where, and I think this was absolutely mutual. It was the same for Jeremy. Is that the promise was not, I'm going to become an ally with your loved one. The promise was, I'll see what I can do, and that sort of thing. And so in that sense, John didn't necessarily promise to say, I'm going to become a permanent alliance with Val. He was saying, I'll try to protect her. And to his mind, he did try to protect her. It was just that because she also had this lie about the double idols, he thought, well, I'm going to take that at face value. I'm going to tell her to play one of the idols, and if she does, she'll be safe, and I've kept my promise. And so that's enough. That's all I have to do. I don't have to fill her in on more of this plan necessarily. I don't have to do these other things. I don't have to actually lobby my alliance to not vote for her, because I can flush this idol instead. And so I think that was ultimately it's why Val really kind of sunk herself there, because John really was actually trying to protect her, even if he thought the half measure would be sufficient. Right. But I think in this case, like this time, the problem comes down to, it's all about appearances, right? Because people can only go by what they know or what they've seen. And on the other tribe, now I'm not saying that I'm not defending Natalie, because I think she was overly aggressive in her trash talking. I think she had probably worked herself up emotionally because she was upset about Nadia, and she was making that same connection of like, oh, well, Jeremy says he's racist. He promised to take care of Val and didn't. And so maybe he's really the one calling the shots over there. And he's also why Nadia is out. And if she's feeling lonely, you could see how that could work her up. And
I feel like that worked up all of them. I think they all worked each other up. Like Jeremy started that with like, I know who he is, and this is who he is, and telling everybody, and then Nadia's like, yeah, that must be, he must be calling the shots, and they, that's what I said, I think I said this earlier, what it did was it gave them permission to take their anger out on him, whereas had he just been another individual, or had he never made that promise, they wouldn't have felt so free and clear to be that angry.
Right.
In a social game,
Yeah, if he had been just another guy and didn't have this public persona kind of haunting him here, I do think that it wouldn't have played out the way it did. They wouldn't have had the same reason to get so angry with him. I think they would have been more inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt if maybe he did try and there was just nothing he could do. But the problem is he doesn't get the benefit of the doubt because he does have this history that's, haunting him. And the other thing is too that, there was a Q&A with Probst where Dalton Ross asked him specifically, before the big blow up at the challenge, was his trash talk more aggressive? And Probst said that it was within the boundaries of what people do on the show. It wasn't extreme, but at the same time, because of these connotations, the same thing coming from him doesn't necessarily mean this, it carries more weight. It feels meaner because it's him saying it. And maybe that's not fair, except that, who else is to blame for that, really? Right? I think, if he wants to make up for saying some things that people thought were offensive so that people will realize he's really not racist, he needs to work harder. And again, it's like, I'm not saying he said anything this time that was racist or had that connotation necessarily, but at the same time, she's getting angry with him. If he wanted this whole thing to blow over and to show that he's really not the person they're accusing him of, if you were a man, I'd knock your teeth out, is not the right thing to say. I mean, even before he said that, you could see his own tribe mates trying to calm him down.
And his girlfriend.
Yeah.
Yeah, people, his tribe and the other tribe were like, John, just stop, just, let it go.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that's ultimately the problem. And I think, it wasn't just that, because as you put it, it was mainly Josh that turned the tide over there later, in terms of actually leading the effort to have him vote out. And he had a lot of gameplay reasons too. I think part of that whole equation was originally what he had said is it's fine for him to be not likable because you can carry someone like that kind of as your shield to the end and then they won't win. But if he is so negative that you potentially get splash damage just from standing next to him, that's not good. You lose, he stops being an effective shield.
Yeah, and there's also still the undercurrent of that he's playing a very impulsive game, and that's not a guy you want to be partnered with. Like it's hard to trust somebody who plays on those kind of whims, Mm-hmm. But I honestly believe that that he, John Rocker got voted out because he didn't play a very good Survivor game, not because he was John Rocker. Yeah. It's almost the same reason why Jeremy and not Natalie. Which one? Nadia? Which one was it?
Nadia is the one that was voted out. Natalie is the one that's still.
Natalie's the one that's in. It's why, like the same reason that Jeremy and Natalie felt like it was okay to get that angry with him. It was the same reason why he got voted out this early, is because Josh felt like it made it easier to make that decision. Mm-hmm. When he's weighing it back and forth and saying, I'm not necessarily sure I trust this guy. He's been, he's told Jeremy this one thing that didn't make sense, and then he sort of played that, and then he's got this idol, and he didn't tell me about it, and I don't think he'd help me, but he could help us in challenges, and he does think I'm his ally. I don't really know. Oh, well, he's got all this other stuff. Let's just go this way.
Yeah.
That's how I really felt like it went down. So he gave them permission by being who he is, but he did not get voted off because he was, trash talking in the challenge or because he's John Rocker and he has all this baggage. He got voted off because he was not trustworthy and he did not gel with his alliance and solidify with them. He did impulsive things and didn't think about it.
Yeah, I think the only nuance I would put on that, I agree largely. I still think the trash talk he did at the challenge did hurt him, and it's not like that was it. It was more a matter of if he's the kind of guy who cannot resist saying that sort of thing when provoked, it just feeds into this whole idea that he is not someone you can count on. He's impulsive. He's negative. You can't rely on him, and that
Right.
he is going to be a target from lots of other people.
Yes.
And so I think that contributed to that whole thing. It wasn't just a let's vote him out because we don't like him now. Although I would imagine that there were some people who voted for him for that reason. But I don't know. I agree, though. I think Josh was more concerned with his game is all over the place and I can't count on him. And I am worried that I will be tarred by association.
Right. And Baylor and the other girl, Jacqueline, right?
Yeah. Although I went half the episode thinking it was Kelly, and then because they didn't actually have her talk, I forgot who was on which tribe.
Yeah. They were going to vote for anybody.
Yeah.
Josh really led the charge and got Wes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Got, Wes was in. Wes has already said a million times that he's playing the game of as long as it's not me.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he knows that there's all of this momentum, like he did read the momentum very well. So I'll give him credit for that. Like it's not just that he's like, okay, everybody's voting that way, I'll do that. He did have some things to say for himself, but he took the temperature properly and said, you know what, Josh seems pretty good on this. Like the two girls are there. I didn't like that. Let's just go with this. This is the right thing to do. And I don't think any of them didn't like him. I think it was just that.
Well, they talked about the negativity and that was part of what they wanted to get out of their camp.
Yeah.
True. But I at the same time, I think what happened is that he made everybody uncomfortable. That wouldn't have necessarily been enough to do it. But that plus Josh deciding, you know what, I think this guy is a hindrance rather than a help. We need to get rid of him. We need to cut him loose. I think that was what, turned it, because otherwise they might have still been thinking to stick with the plan. So what Josh did was he managed to bring Wes and Alec in to vote with him, Jacqueline, and Baylor. And Dale was the only one that Bale and John were the only ones that didn't get told about this plan. And we'll come back to Tribal Council later, I'm sure, but I just wanted to emphasize Survivor, thank you. This is a blindside. When someone really has no idea, they have an idol and don't play it, that's a blindside. If you just don't know, is it going to be me or is it going to be you, and I get voted out, that's not a blindside. That's just a surprise.
Yeah.
But anyway.
When we get to Tribal Council, it shouldn't have been. Because there were some people in there that laid it out to a point where he should have known that he should at least play his idol.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't all adhere to that, let's not give him any clues. Like, Jacqueline pretty much said, like, and I just don't understand how he didn't see that when she's like, if everything goes the way we're planning, then, it's not going to be one of us. And he couldn't have thought, oh, they definitely think Dale's going. Like, he had to know there was some other plan that they were convinced of, and whether he thought it was him or not, if he knows the girls are confident that it's somebody else has a chance of going home, he can't have believed his stupid Dale story was like enough. He had to just be like, well, maybe I should be careful here, because they don't seem convinced. They don't seem like neither of them was resigned that they were going home. Like, they were way too confident this should not have been a blindside. Like, he should have looked at that, and I thought he did. Like, he seemed to look over it when she was talking about how convinced she was that they weren't going home. And he kind of looked over and he's like, well, that's weird.
Well, I think he's also just...
Like, there's not that many people. If it's not one of them two, you become in that field.
He also believed Val when she said she had 2 idols, even after he had found one himself. I think he's a little gullible. He's not super sharp socially.
I would agree.
Big shock, right? I don't, I think, not to say that, someone being smart and having some non-PC views are incompatible, but at the same time, I am not shocked to find those 2 things cohabiting in his head. Actually, I didn't say that very well, but anyway, I think everyone knows what I meant. Yeah, but I think he did not pick up on the signals. I agree that he should have been more suspicious than he was. I think maybe what he was thinking is, it doesn't matter who Baylor and Jacqueline are voting for because we have the majority. And so even if they have now been convinced that they've got something going on, it won't work because we have the majority and nothing they can do would make any difference. So obviously he was mistaken, but at the same time, I think that may have been why he didn't pick up on certainly anything that the girls said wouldn't have cracked that armor, because he had this wrong perception about that. So,
yep.
Anyway, though, we spent a lot of time talking about John Rocker, which I think is fitting, but let's go ahead and jump back to the beginning of the episode. It's interesting that we're told a little bit more context about how the votes went last time, which we kind of pieced together, but we were told it explicitly this time, which the idea is that it was going to be a split vote with the intent of sending Baylor home. Then when they wanted to make sure to flush the idol, so the idea was to flush the idol with the split vote and then send Baylor home because Val was going to play the idol. But then when Josh figured out by John and Val going off together, he probably told them what was going to happen, and Val and Jacqueline are going to vote for Baylor in order to save Val and potentially make it so that she doesn't have to play her idol, right? And so he wanted to switch to make it not a tie.
Which would have been that actually would have been the smart play for them. Like, that's the funniest part about this, is if Val had actually gone over there and, like, say John wouldn't have been so flabbergasted by the fact she didn't have an idol that he would have probably just voted for himself, like he ended up doing afterwards. Say he was a reasonable, not impulsive. Had they gone off together and he'd been like, look, I'm trying to save you. You're going to need to play your idol. And she was like, look, that's not going to work. I don't have an idol. He could say, well, we're splitting the votes, so the way to save you then is you and Jacqueline need to vote for Baylor. That way the split doesn't occur anymore, or the split becomes uneven. That actually, so Josh put together what should have been their plan if they were trying to save Val. Which that's why I found that incredibly amusing, is that he put this situation on them that none of them had any clue. Like, they were so far from coming to that conclusion.
There were several complex plans in play that were overlapping in an entertaining way through all that. But kudos to Josh, who basically figured out more or less exactly what was going on and made his key precision move. And then the benefit that he has at that point is that there's basically nothing that John could say to complain about that move without admitting that he was trying to protect Val. You know what I mean? It's like if Josh's explanation is basically Val was going to mess up our plan by voting for Baylor and not play her idol, then, my vote, was to make sure that she would go. And the only reason John would really have to complain about that is because he's upset that Val went. Baylor, though, is still spooked, but, at the same time, she can't not rely on Josh because, they're outnumbered. She's kind of stuck, relying on anyone who will even talk to her. Meanwhile, over at Hunapu, we have a sneak preview for what I guess is the main feature next week, which is that Drew is kind of a screw up, maybe? What do you think? What's the right word here?
Well, Jeremy refers to him as the moron.
Yeah.
And even talks about how he wanted to take Drew, the moron, really far, but it's starting to look like he's even too stupid to take that far.
Mm-hmm. Because we see at first him specifically informing helpfully everybody else that they need to reinforce their shelter roof because it's going to rain, and then we see everyone's weaving the palm fronds, but no, he thinks that boring, so he's going to sleep instead. And then it was just this whole dynamic where he goes to sleep. Everyone's laughing that he's sleeping while they're all working. Natalie, plays with the bamboo, and then he has the lack of self-awareness to essentially complain that, can't believe you'd poke me with stuff right when I'm trying to fall asleep. And then she's just kind of like, what? Dude, you're falling asleep while we're all sitting here working. We should respect that you want to sleep while we work.
Well, we do the work that you instigated. He was the one, at least the way we saw it, he was the one that instigated, pushed for them to.
Mm-hmm. And he was kind of saying, I have other assets. Weaving is not one of them. And we're thinking, so you're going to get water, you're going to get firewood, you're doing something else that's helpful to the tribe?
No, he's sleeping.
Yeah.
And I just love that they had either if they actually had the mic on him and he was snoring, or if they just layered in snore sound effects. It was pretty funny.
Yeah. And I think we also got the sneak preview there that I think Natalie was prepared to have this all just be kind of funny, but then when he actually complained, like somehow they didn't have the right to wake him. I think that, we saw the sneak preview of she does not respond to that kind of attitude well.
No, she's I think she genuinely went into it with a teasing mentality.
Yeah.
Really, you're going to sleep? Well, then I'm going to screw with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll laugh it off, and then maybe you'll realize that you're an idiot and you'll start weaving some palms.
Yeah.
Some palms. I felt like that was how she had this planned in her head. And then be like, God, can't you see I'm sleeping? Yes.
Yeah, we can all see that you're sleeping, dude.
Yeah, that's why I'm waking you, because we are working and you are not. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he had the lack of self-awareness that led him to actually try to defend that briefly, which was just poor planning on his part because there's really no appropriate defense for it. But anyway, so yeah, Drew is it's like we talked about when we were doing the pre-show between Drew and Alec. Drew is the one that dropped out of school and became a model, except now he's a marketer for the family business or something. And so, yeah, he seems kind of like he's the ne'er-do-well of these two brothers so far.
Yeah, he doesn't look like he's going to have that redemptive arc that Vetus had.
Yeah, not so far anyway. He's certainly not in the headspace right now of thinking he even needs one. I mean, Vetus was already the recovering drug addict, and so therefore knowing, he kind of had his rock bottom, so to speak, already and is already on trying to work his way up. I think Drew still has a fundamental lack of realization that there's anything to fix.
Yeah.
So, the time for the hero duel. I guess they call it the hero arena, right? So I don't know. Yep. Hero duels works for me. But of course, we have to show up first and realize that Val's gone. And so my note was, Jeremy looks pretty pissed. John Rocker looks uncomfortable and should. And Jeremy yells over to the other team that the men are taking over there. And, it was interesting, too, because that obviously played into the dynamic of what happened at the other challenge, too. But I liked kind of Jacqueline at the tribal council pointing out, it's like yelling over to the women, like, we should stop the men from taking over when we're already outnumbered 5-2. Like, What do you want us to do, dude? Yeah. So that it's interesting that would be the tack they use. Because if that's the idea, is you want to stop the men from voting out all the women, it's like it's already too late for the women to try to turn those tables. All they can do is just try to survive at this point.
Right. Yes.
But anyway,
the majority is picking off the minority.
Yeah.
Stop that. Yeah.
But then, of course, we have John explicitly apologize to Jeremy and admit that he promised to protect Val, and all the rest of his tribe is going, what? Wait a minute. And so I think you're right, too, that's kind of the sort of thing that Josh is kind of going, okay, not only did you have this ulterior motive that you didn't tell us about, but now you're just admitting it in front of everybody. Because the person you already broke a promise to is mad at you for it. So you're going to just tell everybody that there was a promise that you broke.
Right.
And that you broke it without meaning to. Like it wasn't like you made a strategy decision to not hold it up. It was that you tried to do something and failed. And now you're talking about it in front of everybody. So none of that. I mean, it's nice at least that, I even believe that there was sincerity in his apology. It wasn't just a matter of, whoops, I screwed up. Now he's going to be mad. I need to try to do damage control. I think he was sincere that he didn't mean for Val to go home, and now he feels bad because he broke a promise. I think that was sincere. But I think it's also just a matter of he is the sort of person who kind of says, well, I said I'm sorry, so you have to forgive me now.
Yeah, I would agree.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, the reward will be the comfort, tarp, hammock, mattress, blankets, etc., or they can trade it for the fishing gear that Hunapu walked away without last time. And then Wes volunteers because he thinks his dad won't be good at this balance and dexterity-based challenge.
I like that. Like, I'm volunteering because I can win.
Yeah. Well, and, I continue to like both Wes and Keith and Wes and Keith together.
Yes, and also we're in a different spot now where we've realized that Exile Island isn't really that big a deal.
Mm-hmm.
So to send your loved one there, it's really not that. It's not really a problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that hard to live there, despite how much they keep trying to make it look like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and,
I mean it's uncomfortable for a night at worst.
Right.
It's not like the first time where you're missing out on that crucial time of getting to know your tribe. It's less of a big deal now. Plus the possibility of getting an idol clue, right?
Right. Yeah, if you have good relationships, then being on Exile Island is not an issue. You know, you are just gone for a day, just like any friendship. Like, you don't see them every day, and you remain friends because you have a connection. So if the connection is already there, the Exile Island is really just, it's discomfort for a day.
Yeah.
So, you know, he was assisted by that, but also, again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about later in the episode. Wes does seem to be a guy who can read the temperature very well. Like, he seems to be very aware without knowing he's aware. Like, I feel like he
kind of does it instinctively.
Right. There was sort of this instinctive, like, I don't mind beating my dad and sending him because I know it's not going to negatively impact him in the long course of the game. Like, he's not going to be teared up about it the way Jeremy was about having to send Val, like, on the first night. Like, he's realized, even if it's not, you know, deliberate decision, like, he seems to have figured that out. He's like, oh, this is actually a great thing to do. Like, I want to get in here because I can beat my dad. It doesn't matter. Like, again, all these thoughts aren't going through his head. Like, I can beat my dad, send him to Exile Island. It's not a big deal for him. We get some reward, and you know, this is a great situation. So he sort of picked up on all the cues of why this is the right time to be the guy who steps up and says, I'm going to do this because I want to beat him. Like, this is not a, oh my God, you know, if I win, there's this conflicting emotion, you know, which, you know, they made it sound like that's in his personality, but I guarantee if Wes had gone against his dad in week 1, it'd be a little different. You know, Wes picked the opportune moment to strike at his dad in a challenge he knew he could beat him. So I'm starting to give him some credit for really picking up on signals, and, you know, he hasn't done anything like, made any great plans or done anything phenomenal Survivor-wise, but he really just seems to be a guy who gets the weather real well. Yeah.
Well, and then good for him for actually winning too. So getting that fishing gear for his tribe.
Yep, and getting their first win. I mean, they needed a win. That was the other part I meant to mention, is that, like, it was critical that they got a win. So for him to step up and say, like, I'm going to do this because I know I can win. Like, it just kind of was this perfect storm of, like, when to go after your old man, you know, and no, you're not. There's no emotional, which it was funny because there was emotion, but not because he was worried his dad was in danger. The emotion came because he got some respect out of his dad in a way that he'd never heard vocally before, which was a nice moment. You know, it was what they want out of this season, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm liking Wes. And I mean, his dad has been. I liked the way his dad, like, stepped into when we didn't know Exile wasn't a big deal. Stepped into it with a real positive, like, yeah, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to take care of your wife. And although it's funny because that almost set up, like, this whole narrative of, like, people have to take care of Jeremy's wife.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Well, what was weird too is how that did become sort of a repeated theme of people trying to take care of Val when she was the one right up front who said she didn't need to have people take care of her. So
right, and then made it very difficult for them to take care of her by making up absurd lies.
Yeah, you know, I still am just stuck on that because I wouldn't even blame her for trying to say she had one, but I just don't get two. Like that.
I've tried to explain it to you. I know it doesn't make sense. I know she thought saying two she thought. I'm not saying it's a good reason. It's that she's smart enough to know that if I have an idol and they want to get me out, and there's so many of them, they can flush it. But if I have two, they can't.
Mm-hmm.
And there you go. I'll tell them I have two. Like she didn't go into the whole reality check of like there's no way I would have two days into the game. Mm-hmm. It was, oh man, if I have one, I'm still in danger, but two, I'm not. Oh, I'll tell them I have two. And I know that's just not connecting for you, but that is the reasoning she went through. I guarantee it.
Well, I mean, I believe that could be it. What I struggle with is that seeming like a good idea. I mean, I get that chain of logic, but I feel like the obvious flaws are just too obvious. But again, we're not really disagreeing.
I envy your
here.
privileged life where you don't deal with people who make decisions based on flawed logic all the time. Yeah.
Well, that's not really true. I mostly just stubbornly refuse to acknowledge their presence most of the time. I try to. It's like, but there's got to be some reason that makes sense that you would have done such a thing. There's got to be, because otherwise my whole world makes no sense. Or not. Anyway. So
then Jeremy goes back to camp upset.
Yeah. But then we also got, so, you know, John tries again with I did everything I could, brother. I didn't. I gave that an emphasis that he didn't, which is, I don't mean to imply anything there. But what I wondered is, it's like, how hard is it going to be to trash talk John Rocker with Julie there? But the answer was not that hard, apparently, especially because she made it easier by leaving to go cry by herself.
Yeah. They were angry enough that they weren't worried about that part of it.
Yeah.
I found it amusing.
Okay, go ahead.
Probably for the wrong reasons, but Jeremy's like, yeah, that's John Rocker. You know, he said a bunch of racist and homosexual stuff.
Yeah, I know. The way he misspoke that was kind of...
It's like, you know, that's not what he said, but... You know.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was weird, especially just, I mean, I feel like he must have elaborated, but they did still choose that clip. I wouldn't be surprised if they chose that clip because he kind of misspoke.
Yeah,
it makes it more interesting.
Thought it was funny.
Yeah. But yeah, they are not particularly sensitive to how Julie might be feeling about all this because they just, you know, there's blood in the water as far as they're concerned. I am ambivalent about Julie's response to that whole thing because on the one hand, I could completely understand it, you know, because this is probably something, you know, she gets all the time anyway. You know what I mean?
But also like hyper real, you know?
Yeah.
Like there's no way she gets it in like this kind of a stressful situation, like with, you know, where it's so amped up. Like again, everybody's low on food. You're in this like strategy game. They're extra angry because he's now like supposedly like masterminded voting off their loved ones. And it could potentially impact your ability to do well in something that you're only here to do. Like, there's no way that hyper situation has ever happened to her. So it's almost like taking all of those conversations that she's probably heard over however long she's been with him and like magnifying them into like one afternoon. Like,
yeah,
you can understand she's probably a little upset. You know?
Yeah. So
at the same time, it didn't do her any good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think the problem is that as much as it would be very uncomfortable for her to sit there listening to all of that, I think going off by herself just really it just further isolates her from the rest of the tribe. And I think that it probably also, for that matter, I don't know that she could have calmed them down necessarily, but I don't, at least we didn't see her try. We didn't see her try to say, you know, sometimes he lets his mouth get away from him, but he really isn't like that. You know, I mean, we didn't see her try to calm them down in that way. You know what I mean? Maybe she did and we just didn't get it, but we didn't see it. What we saw is her not only going off by herself, but then even when Missy follows her and tries to reassure her, she's not even really accepting the reassurance. She's basically just saying, you know, not only am I upset for all these other things, but also it sounds like he has screwed up my game and it's just hopeless now. There's nothing I can do. Which is like, I get it, but is not a helpful.
Self-fulfilling.
Yeah.
Had they lost the challenge, I feel like she would have been voted off.
I think so.
Because there was enough anger there that would have, you know, and they're still early enough in everything, and they haven't had to vote anybody off yet.
Right.
So they're still in that we need to find a reason that's easy for everybody. Mm-hmm. That would have been it. Definitely would have been it.
If nothing else, she interferes with their group hatred of John Rocker by being there uncomfortable as proof positive that there is at least one person who loves him.
Yes.
So she interferes with the narrative through her presence.
Yeah. So him voting off is probably the best thing for her game at this point.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's like literally the only thing that could save her. I'm not convinced that she is completely saved, but I agree that she would have been the one to go, I think, and that now that he is gone, she can hopefully try to separate her own game from his. Remains to be seen, though. We'll have to see how that progresses, because I don't think she's in the right headspace to do what she's going to need to do right now. But we'll see how she reacts when she sees he's gone. So over at Exile, we have Keith and Josh. And I appreciated Dalton Ross characterizing that as there's a new sitcom coming to NBC, Spoonin'. Keith and Josh. But I enjoyed this whole segment too, just in the sense of them both very aware of how different they are in terms of where they come from and, you know, their interests and hobbies and background and everything, and yet still getting along, you know, just kind of like, you know, Wes said, and it's funny too, just because Wes kind of said that was part of why he picked Josh, is he thinks they'd click, and they did. They got along just fine because they're both nice people.
I get that. Okay, yeah, we're down to my next note of like my sort of like I'm starting to really dig Wes on these things. Like he's got this feeling like of how things are going. Like he really clicked, because no one would think that. Like no one would say yes. Like that's the whole joke of the whole like interaction is the hick from Louisiana and the gay guy from New York City getting along. But Wes pegged it. Like Wes didn't, like he didn't pick it. Like I thought he picked it because he thought it'd be funny because his dad would be uncomfortable. But when he comes in and says, "Oh yeah, they'll click," I'm like, really? And then they do, and they're astonished that they do. Like, yeah. Again, props to Wes for figuring that out. Like for having that, like just being able to like see and feel that. Like he's got an intuition for this game that I'm not saying I'm rooting for him as my favorite, but I'm feeling like he's gonna make it a long way because he really has. I feel like he knows how to navigate this pretty well. You know?
Yeah, I agree. It's like he's not a super cerebral player like say Josh, for example, and yet at the same time, I think you are absolutely right in he has this sort of sixth sense about it that he just reads the situations very well and the dynamics, and he's able to sense the changing of the wind and respond appropriately. But even if he's less proactive,
right?
So far,
it's like really good card players. There's yes, you're always going to be better if you can count them.
Mm-hmm.
But you can be a very good card player and not have the ability to count the cards, as long as if your brain can like catalog, X number of diamonds have come through, X number of spades, without knowing that actual number, there's a visual way that you can that some people are very good at, of realizing that one suit has been played this much, or this many face cards have come, and this, and you get the perspective of how much has been played, so that you can make a good decision, even though it's not as accurate as someone who counts them. You can make a pretty solid call, and that's kind of where Wes is. Like he doesn't calculate the situation, but he's got this feeling of like where things are and makes the decision that's in the best interest. So I'm liking him.
Yeah, I agree. I also just was amused with the just eating the snails. That was just a nice bit of business for Keith and Josh to work on while they're getting along.
Yep.
So meanwhile, back at Coyopa, John is catching catfish for the tribe. There's not a lot more to that, although we get a little bit of, Wes setting up the, it's like, oh, well, we're eating, so maybe we'll have a leg up in the challenge.
Yeah, and I feel like a little bit of that edit is in there so that we understand a little bit more why it's difficult to vote off John.
Mm-hmm.
That because he hasn't been absolutely killing challenges. He performs fine, but I think they wanted to make sure that we understand that this isn't an easy decision for the tribe. Like, he is doing good things. There are good things about him. It's just not, that. So I feel like that was a big part of it. So anyway.
But so anyway, we have this is where I had to go back and modify my notes afterwards, because I kept thinking Jacqueline was Kelly. But so at this point, we still, even before the challenge, we have Baylor and Jacqueline approaching Wes and Alec about voting out John. And they cite, they're talking about his anger and negativity. And this is like even before the immunity challenge.
I guess you're right. I didn't take notes on that. That's part of.
Now that said, I think at this point, we have Wes and Alex specifically say that they kind of humor the girls, but are not intending to go with them.
That's right. I do remember that.
Yeah. I couldn't help but think that even if it's in the middle of the night and they're pretty sure John is asleep, they're kind of talking pretty loud right there in the shelter. Seems uncareful. But anyway, yeah, so we did get that even before the blow up at the council, or at the challenge, excuse me. This was kind of a fun challenge. I liked the whole aspect of, if you miss, you have to go climb through the obstacles again to get the ball.
Right. Yeah. It's one of the things that we've always complimented the challenge builders on, is when they take two things they know we do well, and tethered races through obstacle courses are always fun because there's lots of dirt and crashing in and blood and all that fun stuff.
You make them have to cross paths because they'll body check each other. Yep,
all good. And the shooting of the basket challenge is a pretty good staple. It's a fairly easy, if you're not going to put a puzzle into it, this is it's a very nice capstone to a challenge. As you have to shoot this, or there's lots of shooting basket ones. Whether it's shooting baskets and making a weight come down, or just getting more baskets than the other team. So again, they combine the two. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
So, I liked it. It was another one of my unreasonable. Like there were a lot of times where I felt like the one tribe was being a little unreasonably angry, and like when, oh my God, they body checked us. That was nice sportsmanship. Chill out.
Yeah. Well,
the challenge is designed for you to run into each other. Just because they use it as a way to gain an advantage doesn't make them unsportsmanlike. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of times, of veering out of your own way just to trip the other person, and that wasn't even just John Rocker that did that.
No, and John didn't. John wasn't one that was doing it the most. John was just the one that took the heat for all of it.
Well, he did it once. He did it to Reed.
Oh, he definitely did it, but he only did it the one time. Everybody on his tribe was doing it, and the other tribe was trying it too. They were just, one tribe was just better at it, and it's not against the rules,
like when Wes did it,
unsportsmanlike.
When Wes did it and tripped Natalie, though, John was like, yes.
But he didn't do it.
Well, he had done it earlier. Now, again, this is why I think it's valuable information that, Probst was asked, was his trash talking out of the ordinary? Was it really extreme in terms of being mean or bad sport, that sort of thing? And what he said again was that, he was doing it a lot, but it was sort of within the realms of what people do on the show. And it was that it was taken more extremely just because of who he is. So again, is that fair? Maybe not, because someone else who is a stranger wouldn't have been, so damaging. But at the same time, he is who he is, and he has to, he has to work with that. Those are the cards that he has dealt, and he dealt some of them to himself.
Yes, he did.
I agree, though. I don't think, at least what we see on screen, he wasn't doing anything really extreme and not enough to justify how angry they were back at him. But again, like I said, I think what must have happened, and this doesn't justify it necessarily, but I think they had gotten themselves all worked up into a frenzy because they probably believed at that point, they had talked themselves into thinking that he was this mastermind that had deliberately orchestrated getting out Nadia and then Val because he's a racist. Now, there's some irrationality going on in there, but at the same time, I think it's not a total mystery how they might come to that conclusion. So I agree, though, that, just based on what we saw, at least, they were overreacting. Natalie, especially, she just seems like she's that kind of person that she does not take BS. She dishes it right back and, perhaps escalates. She certainly did here. She escalated it beyond, he was trash talking, but she was the one that made it explicitly personal and not, and outside the boundary of the challenge. He's the one that's saying, let's win the challenge, do what you need to do to win the challenge. She was the one that made it personal. Like, you are a racist person and your tribe should vote you out. That is the escalation, definitely.
Oh yeah.
That said, I think if he wanted to convince everybody that he is not the person that they think he is, he did not do a good job of that.
No.
So anyway, poor Coyopa, You know, they won the reward challenge, but they still lost immunity in the tiebreaker round. So Baylor is worried now because even though she has she is even more got her mind made up that John needs to go, but she's also still just thinking it would be so easy for the guys to just stick with their original plan. They've already voted for me in 2 previous councils. Why wouldn't they just keep going? But she is also motivated at that point to say, well, I need to try to convince everybody that John is this terrible person that needs to go, because that's in her interest at that point. Even beyond however much she really feels it. And what I thought actually was really interesting, and I have to give John Rocker credit here, is his recognition where he actually approached the girls and tried to tell them that the plan was to blindside Dale. And we know from the confessionals that he wasn't really planning to do that, and also that they didn't actually believe him anyway. But I give him credit for the move of not just ignoring them because we've got them outnumbered and therefore that nothing they can do matters. I give him credit for feeling like, well, it's selfish, but it's a smart move is what I mean, is that he is aware that you can't ignore people just because you think they're outnumbered. He's proactive. He is managing them, even if he was not ultimately successful in doing so. Of course it's selfish. He's playing Survivor.
Yes. But it was prompted by, like, oh man, they may try to target me. I should tell them it's Dale, then they'll never think of me.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, he's thinking it's like they might try to get me, but if I give them a possibility of getting someone else out, maybe they'll go for that instead of trying to go after me. But I think my point is that several mistakes that people have made on the show before are when they say, we outnumber them 5-2, therefore it doesn't matter what they think or say. We don't even have to talk to them. We can safely ignore them, and then that bites people in the butt. But he was being proactive about saying we need them to think that there's this other plan, even if it didn't work, obviously. And then, of course, he then also, I think this is another, it's again, he's doing the right things, but the execution is somewhat lacking. I think that's ultimately, the issue with a lot of his game is, like, for example, managing the people that you're targeting, but then also going to each one of the people in your alliance to just make sure everybody's on the same page. He did that too. I think, unfortunately, it was maybe just a case of his impulsiveness and his intensity made just the execution fall flat a little bit, even if on paper he's doing the right things strategically.
Oh, the culmination of that is his conversation with Josh.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, he considers, is my number one ally. So I need to tell him about my immunity idol and make sure that, all our cards are on the table. But his execution was awful. Like, he made it seem like I have an idol and I have no intention of sharing it with you. I don't think he tried. I don't think that was what he was trying to do in that conversation. Mm-hmm. But that's definitely, I read it the same way Josh did. I didn't think he was unreasonable to believe that John was telling him he had an idol and that he was going to keep it to himself, and that it wasn't like, not that he has any obligation, but there's sort of that social cue of like, hey, this makes us stronger. But no, It was like, yeah, doing pretty well. That's how he didn't mean that, but that's how it came across.
Well, right, because there's all this subtext of like it's bragging a little bit, and then there's also just the little hidden bit of like, well, and anyone who thinks they might want to try to target me is going to be out of luck because I've got an idol. And, that's, of course, why they had to blindside him, but they successfully did because he's not very good at picking up on the cues of people going behind his back.
Right. So, yes, he did a lot of the right things. His execution is horrendous. It was, and that one thing that was so, like, I'm just watching there in pain, being like, there are so many other ways that this exact conversation could happen that would be good for you. Like, there are so many ways that you could meet with Josh, your ally who's having reservations about you, share with him that you have an idol and rebuild trust and momentum. And instead, you manage to make that like, yeah, we definitely got to get rid of him.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the confessional said before we went to tribal council. Oh, this is so tough. Josh knew what he wanted to do at that point.
Right.
That was a culmination of Val and him going off into the woods, him admitting that's why they went off into the woods, because he made this impulsive promise to Jeremy, to him blowing up at the challenge,
making himself a huge target, and just alienating everybody socially, even if it's not,
Yep, and then the culmination was this awkward exchange where he sort of brags about having an idol, and it just that was the nail in the coffin, And I'm glad that you didn't say that earlier when we were talking about how his blow up was, a big reason why it like snowballed it into him getting voted out. Like, I actually thought you were going to use that term, like, that was his nail in the coffin, and so I was going to correct you and say, no, actually, it was this. That was like the ceiling of the coffin.
Right.
This was the final nail.
Well, yeah, it was definitely Josh's call that led to what actually happened. Everyone, I think, was more primed to go along with it, partly because of how he behaved at the challenge. I mean, I think that contributed to just how everybody felt about him, and was why there wasn't a lot of people going, well, I don't think we should do that. Nobody was prepared to come to his defense, really, But I agree, they might have been more inclined to just passively go along with the original plan. Yeah. To just go along with, the plan was to get rid of Baylor, and then, John is strong in challenges, and so you could say, okay, well, we'll just keep going with what we're doing. And it was Josh that precipitated, actually changing that, making a move, approaching Alec and Wes to say, hey, let's me and the girls get John out this time, and not let him know, because, so we can get him out with his idol too. Just imagine, though, what the next day at camp would have been like if he had figured it out at the last minute and played his idol and was still there. I kind of almost am sorry to see that.
That was actually what I was hoping for, just to see how that would all go down,
Yeah. So. But nope, he gets voted out with, quote, a goddamn idol in his pocket. Yeah, so it was just him and Dale that voted for Baylor. So Dale is not in good shape either right now, if he's the one they felt they couldn't tell about what they were going to do. Although at the same time, I'm not sure Dale is necessarily a target for any other reason at the moment.
No, but I don't think Baylor and Jacqueline are in great spots either, because it's very easy now to go back to your old alliance now that you got rid of the guy that was causing problems.
Yeah, they're still outnumbered 4-2. So
yeah, so it's just go back to it. I think that and I'll be curious when we get the scene. Before we get into the scenes for next time, I would like to say, considering like how angry he got in the challenge when they lost, he was a very gracious loser of getting voted off. Like, he didn't blame them. Like, he wasn't angry about it. He actually, it was the first time he's actually been self-reflective of, you know what? I'm the guy that just got voted off with an idol in my pocket, the one thing I didn't want to be. You know, he realized it was all his own fault for not playing his idol. I thought he did very well with that. Thought he handled it well.
I agree.
But then, as you said, the scenes from next time, hopefully, it makes it look like something crazy is going to happen.
Yeah, or at the very least, we're going to have Drew say stuff, ridiculous stuff to Probst that's going to make him look stupid. That might be all it is, but you know,
that in and of itself,
I'd be happy to see that too.
Worth watching.
Because it's one thing for people to be dumb within their own tribe, but anytime someone we saw what happened when Reed tried to take on Probst. And that was even with like this whole idea of, I'm going to, approach you with respect as equals. And Probst is going to go, equals? What are you talking about? I am your God. Yes. But for Drew to call Probst on something the rest of his tribe is afraid to say. Yeah. And I love that we just got the shot of Probst going, this is the greatest thing that could have happened to me today.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm excited to see what that's going to be.
Yep. All right.
Yeah, but boy, he is. I'm just reminded of what I think it was Missy that said about him in the first episode, which is he's basically just a young, dumb guy. Yep. So we'll see. Yep. So I think that probably does it for this episode. Thank you, everybody, for watching and or listening. I think this time slot of Thursday evening for the live hangout is when we're going to be trying to target moving forward. There might be some times when we have to do a different time, but that's the general plan. So if you would like to watch live, that's when to do it, and just keep an eye out for those events. And otherwise, the YouTube version and the audio version will still appear as usual. So thank you, everybody, and we'll talk to you later.